My name is David Balkwell. I am the Managing Director of Balkwell Consulting. To contact me, details are at the end of this movie.
Route to registration or certification. Well, certification registration is something which is provided by certification bodies. Certification bodies send in independent auditors who are competent in auditing and that particular industry sector to test compliance of the management system, to test compliance with regards to maybe a British standard or an international standard, or a specification that's been written that needs evidence of benchmarking or testing against. So the route is that essentially you implement the management system as an organisation against the requirements of that standard, and then invite the certification body in to test its compliance. So one is that they're testing compliance against the standard, the other is that they test outputs from the management system. They sample into that information to look for evidence that the system actually works. Now typically when a system has been implemented by an organisation, and many organisations have different, let's talk about organisations having certification bodies, have different criteria, but the golden rule is about 6 months of evidence of output from the management system before a certification body would be in a position to come in and actually test. And the reason for that is that there does need to be sufficient output from the system to test, to see an effective system. So a certification body will be approached by an organisation. It's important that the scope of that particular certification body matches the scope of the organisation that's being assessed. And it may be that accredited certification is something that an organisation seeks. Accreditation bodies are organisations who are independent to the certification bodies and are established in each country to provide a regulatory role of certification bodies. There are certification bodies that are unaccredited, and there are certain schemes and standards that organisations that offer certification services are not accredited for. So it really is down to you as an organisation to decide whether you need an organisation certification body to certify that's accredited or unaccredited, whether it's a customer requirement or whether it's an organisational requirement. That's for something you to establish. But essentially when the management system is in place and there's 6 months evidence, approach a certification body, and they will provide you of course with a quote as to how many days of assessment that would be required to carry out the certification process. Now for most standards the certification process is in 2 stages. The initial stage can comprise a document review or an on-site review to look at evidence that the system is actually in place, that there are no wide open gaps in the system with respect to that particular standard to which the organisation says their system complies. And then at a period or point in time after that first stage, a second stage or phase would take place, where that's more of a test of the effectiveness that the system is implemented, that outputs are there. And at that point, at the end of that particular stage, the stage 2, certification bodies should be in a position to either recommend registration or certification or not. Now it would be expected that at the first stage of document review that any wide open gaps have been addressed. So at stage 2 you wouldn't be having findings that reflect that there are big gaps in the system, but there still could be major findings that would prevent the certification body from offering certification on the basis that the system isn't effective, that there is insufficient output from the management system. Now, of course, a certification body may well want to look at the system itself, but they'll also be looking at the production areas or sites, depending on what the scope of the operations are and what the scope of the assessment is. So say, for example, the scope of the assessment is for the design and installation of fabricated parts. Then clearly design, installation, manufacture, installation, all those words will be checked or tested within the certification assessment process. When the certification body actually then decide that the system does comply and are prepared to make recommendation, typically the assessors on site do exactly that. They make a recommendation, and at that point, when the report is completed and any outstanding findings have been addressed by the company, then the report and the findings will be reviewed by an independent within the certification body. And at that point, when that reviewer deems that the assessment complies, that the system complies, only then will the final report be signed off and a certificate issued. The certification bodies, what they then also do is they then instigate a surveillance regime. Continuing assessment, it's also sometimes known as, where they will then periodically revisit an organisation to test compliance. There are 3-year cycles that are introduced by the certification bodies. So from the initial assessment, a 3-year cycle kicks in. There are minimum clauses within a management system surveillance audit that will be checked, but then at random a series of other planned clauses will be checked throughout the 3-year cycle. And depending on whether the visit cycle is every 6 months or 12 months will depend on how that is planned. But then typically at the end of the 3-year cycle, a reassessment will then take place to make sure that everything is still in place, and then a certificate will be reissued, and then the recycle will start again. And providing there are no major issues identified, then typically the certification will roll on. And of course, the certification bodies at those recertifications, as they're called, are looking for trends, trend analysis over that 3-year cycle. So non-conformities are found, nature of non-conformities, any trends that actually crop out of the surveillance visits. So typically that is the route to registration or certification, as it's sometimes known.